Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is co-host Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. We've just went through a long weekend, and I thought, well, I got to turn on the news today to look at what the majors are saying. And guess what? They're still talking about the election, and I guess we're going to put up with that for a few months. To me, it's looks sort of like going to the circus, and that of course I think has deteriorated. But of course, the other big news this weekend was Scalia dying suddenly, and some people wonder about what's going on, why there wasn't an autopsy, and is it true there was a pillow over his head? Who knows? Who knows what's going on? But there's always bound to be controversy there. Supreme Court is very, very important, and almost like the end of all ends for some people. I don't quite put it into that category because I haven't seen the Supreme Court preserving our liberties very often, and sometimes they definitely go in the wrong direction. And so far, I don't see any true enlightenment from the intellectual debates that are going on in the campaign. But I did see some other things, and I know it didn't get by you, and that is what's happening in one of the hottest spots, if not the hottest spot in the world, and that's in Syria. Things have changed over there. All of a sudden, you know, there's been threats of bombing and then bombing, and now there are threats of troops, and Turkey's getting very much involved. Just think, we have United States involved, we have Russia involved, we have Turkey involved, but this has to do with the Kurds. Now, the way I understand the Kurds is for a long, long time, they have sought their own homeland, but they suffered from the consequences of World War I and never got their piece of the action, and they're still anxious to have that and they haven't given up. But they're very much involved in the skirmish going on in Syria. But just how do you see this thing expanding? Because the bombing looks like it's going to turn into ground troops, which may be a big escalation.
Well, if anything, this demonstrates the absolute folly of U.S. interventionist foreign policy. What started on Saturday, I should back up for a second, because the town of Aleppo, which had been held by al-Qaeda-allied rebels for the past 3 years, is on the verge of being liberated by Syrian government forces and the siege lifted. But to do that, they had to cut off this long line of Islamist rebels. The Syrian army did that last week, which threatens Aleppo. And the Kurds, which you mentioned, moved into that northern pocket on the border of Turkey and Syria of Islamist rebels. The Turks, seeing that, began bombing the Kurds, the YPG, the People's Protection Forces. I know it sounds confusing, but what's interesting about it, I'll just simplify it. The YPG are our great allies in the region. They are boots on the ground. So our NATO ally, Turkey, is bombing our ally on the ground fighting against the Islamic State in Syria, the YPG, the Kurds, and meanwhile, the Turks are also bombing Syrian government forces over the past 4 days, who are allied with Russia. So you have an absolute mess. The US, France, and Russia have all three warned Turkey to stop bombing Syria, but they show no signs of slowing. And in fact, as you point out today, they've called for the U.S. to lead a ground invasion of Turkey, and they promise that they and the Saudis will follow.
You know, well, we've always advocated non-intervention for ourselves, and we don't go around giving a lot of advice to others, but I think it's very clear that maybe Turkey would have been better off by being a non-intervention, stay out of some of these neighborhood fights, although I think they have more justification to be concerned about their neighborhood than we have to, draw these lines. But nevertheless, we have Turkey, they're fighting the Kurds. They're very worried about what the Kurds have done, yet the Kurds are fighting ISIS, but Turkey's still negative on Assad. So they're negative on two groups here. And in the United States, we're very positive, at least for one faction of the Kurds. And we're also very positive for the rebels in general to get rid of Assad. And of course, where are we on ISIS? One day they're the worst enemy in the world and our candidates are screaming and holler, I'll take care of them, and I will smash them to smithereens. At the same time, they end up with our weapons, and they're anxious to get rid of Assad. So this is such pretense and so preposterous, the entanglement of this. So right now, I see very little good coming of this. I see very little success, from the negotiation. All of a sudden, next week they're going to lay down their arms. The big decision, I think, is what will the Saudis do? And it looks like they're not going to go anywhere without American troops and American support. And even if we do, will we admit what we're doing? Our own country doesn't even know. And sometimes I wonder if our own president knows, what the CIA is doing. So it is a mess that although we've talked about it and warned about it, it looks like they've taken one more step to a very dangerous situation.
Well, the reason why it is extremely dangerous now is that Russia is very active in that area. They have been attacking ISIS, attacking Al-Qaeda's Nusra Front in the region, and they are very active in bombing. But the Turks are shelling over the border into Syria, really in an area of conflict between Russia and ISIS and al-Nusra. So we haven't heard anything. We've only heard a couple of specific things from the Russians. Today they're bringing this up to the UN Security Council because obviously it is a violation of international law, the Nuremberg principles. You can't start shelling your neighbors for no reason. But the issue is, will Russia allow Turkey to continue shelling in an area where its military is active and to put Russian military at risk? This thing could escalate beyond anything we've seen for 50 or 60 years.
And that could burst out rather quickly. It could change maybe the nature of the news coverage by our media. Maybe all of a sudden it will become more important. And, although people are very complacent and everybody's happy, at least the consumers are happy that gasoline prices are low, something like this could change the mental status, even with the oil coming out of Iran. I think it's when people are most convinced that, low prices are here forever and nothing can happen. One time it was the prices were high and nothing could happen. We just need to, expand production, have shale oil and all these kind of things. So people who think that we should be complacent and that we're always going to have cheap oil and we don't have to worry about that place over there. We don't hear about many Americans being killed, and yet we're very much involved in this. And I think that is true. I think how Russia responds to this is a big deal. And then I think we're in a bit of a box. But then the hawks in this country are going to be shouting, patriotism, defend our country, there's great danger, ISIS is coming, and they will beat the war drums until, whether it's Obama or the next president, they're likely to escalate this even further. But, it's been a gradual escalation. It has been deteriorating, and I date a serious change in direction in 2011, with Assad. That was our position. Assad, that was like declaring war. Assad had to go. But I think we're at a point now where it's going to continue to escalate. I don't see an easy solution here, and nobody can predict what will happen if some of these Russian troops get killed and it's escalated. Then our politicians are forced to react to that.
And you mentioned Iran, and that's a factor that hasn't come up in our discussion yet, but it's also a very, very important factor. Iran has backed the Hezbollah, which comes out of Lebanon. The Hezbollah has viewed the battle for Aleppo so important that the leader, Nasrallah himself, was involved in the planning to retake Aleppo. So the Iranians also have troops fighting on the ground and military officers and advisors fighting on the ground in Syria. Iran has become a major regional player, partly because of their ascendance in Iraq, the allies of Iran's ascendance in Iraq. And Syria has been a critical ally of Iran, and it really is the lifeline between Iran and Hezbollah. So Iran is also a very important factor, and as we know, Iran and Saudi Arabia have cut diplomatic relations recently. They're at each other's throats as well. So that's another whole big factor, and of course Iran and Russia are cooperating against ISIS, who supposedly is our enemy as well.
And I think it's going to drive that even more so. They've been on friendly terms all along, but if the war gets hotter, I think there will be a lot more willingness for the Russians to further send more weapons to the Iranians. So this to me looks like we ought to keep our eye on this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one final danger, I think if something does happen, the Turks are dying for a pretext to invade. And I think they're going to invoke this idea of the responsibility to protect. That's what the U.S. used falsely in Kosovo and in Libya, and we see both of those have been disasters. They will claim that because of a civilian tragedy and refugees, they're forced to go into Syria, and that will be a false pretext, a false flag, but that is, I think, the real danger.
There you go. And I don't have any hope that the United Nations will solve this problem. The only thing that solves a problem like this is for more and more people at the grassroots level and the people who have to do the fighting and paying for wars take the position that non-intervention is a better way to go than this constant interventionism. And that doesn't go just for the United States. I mean, we have more of a privilege of talking about our own policy, but I think the rest of the countries should look at this too. But it has to be looked at. We're not going to convert the leaders of the different countries like our own leaders. We can only achieve this success if we convince the people who have to fight and die and pay for these wars to back off and stick to their guns when it makes common sense to them, that getting involved in another war, whether it's bombing or sanctions or ground troops, that just stay out of there. Things can work out so much better. But instead, what tends to happen are the governments propagandize, scare the people, and say they're being attacked, and if you don't support it, you're unpatriotic, and there's great danger if you don't do anything. I say the opposite. I say the more we do, and the more the governments get involved in promoting warmongering and military conflict, the worse everybody is as a result. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. And please come back soon.